Hello everyone and welcome to another Learning Lunch hosted by Format Approved. My name is Brian Johnson. I am Senior Director of Online Education with Format Approved and I'll be your moderator for today's session. Today's session is titled Critical and Necessary IT Security Protections, what every business must have in place now to avoid cyber attacks, data breach lawsuits, bank fraud, and compliance penalties. And we're very happy to be joined today by MXOtech. They're going to share their expertise on this question with us today. Today's industry experts, to introduce them, are Joanna Sobran, President and CEO of MXOtech, and Bart Barcewicz, the Director of IT Senior Infrastructure Administrator. You can see a little bit more about them on the slide, but to begin, I'd just like to thank you both for being with us today.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you, Brian.
I think it's going to be a great session, and I look forward to discussing this subject with you. I know there's a lot of people on the call who are interested in it. Before we begin, I'll let you look at the questions that we're going to cover today while I just go over some quick housekeeping notes. People always ask us, can I get the slides? Is there going to be a recording of this event? Don't worry about that. We do record these sessions, and we will send you a follow-up after the session is concluded, after we render the video and everything, so you can watch the recording, share it with colleagues, and look at the slides, because there's going to be lots of interesting links and that sort of thing in here that you'll want to get your hands on. So don't worry about that. We send all of that out after the event. The other brief note is that if you have questions for our experts today, we will usually save those for the end of the session so we can get through everything, but do feel free to enter those into the chat area. If we don't get to your question live, that's fine, because we'll pass that on to our experts and they will follow up in writing, and they may also follow up in writing, if there's complex questions. Sometimes those are best addressed that way anyway. So that is the conclusion of our housekeeping segment. Let's get to the real event. All right, well, thank you again for joining us today. Let's start with the basics, I guess. What is cybercrime? What do we mean when we talk about cybercrime?
Okay, well, I have a slide here that I'm going to take you back to the old days where cybercrime business was pretty simple. You see a guy here, you bought a gun or a knife, you hid out in a dark alley, and when someone would walk by, you jump out and say, stick them up and take their money. So your startup costs and overhead were very low, and if you didn't get caught, you'd be okay. But, of course, just like any business owner, criminals started thinking, how can I grow my business, right? So they shifted their strategy when trains came along. And instead of robbing one person at a time, you could rob 200 to 300 people at a time. And robbing trains was a far more lucrative catch than robbing individuals, because these trains, they were crossing remote areas where they weren't organized police forces. And individuals who were pretty wealthy and could afford a train ticket, they were worth robbing. And they were rounded up and sitting in a single convenient location. So very similar today, thanks to advanced technology. Same like the trains, the new train robberies are cybercrime related. So think about it. If a criminal wanted to rob 100,000 people at once, they couldn't do it the old-fashioned way. Today, all they need is a hack into a single large platform, and they can use advanced technology to instantly rob millions. And as you can see here, they're increasing every day. Most of you, I think, will recognize some of these names here. You've got Target, which was the most recent one, Community Health Services, Anthem, and many large corporations.
Well, yeah, I was just going to add, what's amazing about this chart is the diversity of businesses there. You've got everything from retailers to high-tech companies to social media to financial institutions. It's really anyone that has financial data, it looks like, is at risk for this.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay.
Well, let's move on then and talk more about the digital underground and the black market there.
Okay, so here, what I want to kind of cover is the how this cyber criminal market works. Today, you could even go on YouTube and look at directions on how to commit cybercrime. And there's a big underground market. This is a big business that exists today. Credit cards, they're worth anywhere between $2 and $90. iTunes accounts, $8. Physical credit cards, $190. Medical records are worth $50 for each medical record. Card cloners, $200 to $300, and fake ATMs at $35,000. Okay, and like I said, anyone can easily buy training tools and services for committing this fraud and hacking systems and buying these fake credit cards and setting up fake websites. This is a very big business today.
So there's a lot of, obviously there's a lot of diversity in terms of the information that people want to steal and what they can sell.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially in healthcare, you know, when I mentioned $50 for the medical records, this is just the first 2 pages. And you hear a lot of stories, you know. There was a colleague of mine in Ohio who was supporting a small medical practice, and the office manager's boyfriend, she worked late, so he was able to come to pick her up and get access to their EMR system, downloaded all that information, and had hundreds of thousands of records that he was able to take out. So you got to be really careful, not only just people from the outside hacking into your system, but even your employees and the people, you know, and increasing your security internally from the people that they know.
That's a great point. A lot of these crimes do involve inside actors. So if we focus
Absolutely.
a little bit, oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to say, and you know, your employees have the easiest way to accessing your information sometimes, you know, because we build trust. They're with our companies for a while. They make friends with people that have more access. They can grant them more access, and you know, it's like I mentioned, someone's boyfriend or friend who can earn a lot of money all at once. $50 a record for 100,000 records. So you do the math.
Well, and I assume and I hope that as we get further into the presentation, you'll give us some measures that can even be effective against internal actors, because that's obviously a concern. But if we can turn a little bit more narrowly on healthcare, I mean, you already moved in that direction with the EMR. Why would anyone want to go after providers? I mean, it doesn't seem like they're a big target like Target would be, for example.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, I think that we think that nobody would want to attack me because we're just a small business, right? We don't have as much data, as much information as the large businesses like Target and JP Morgan. But, you know, these larger companies, they have very sophisticated security systems, and believe me, they are not easy to hack. But yet we hear about these, you know, on a daily basis. And if they're getting hacked, I'll tell you, it's a cakewalk for them to get into your business, which is why you're even a bigger target. But the prize, you know, it's not as big. But here's what happens. They have these robots and systems that are working on hundreds of thousands of servers and businesses that they can hack into. So they're able to get into these smaller businesses, and many of them at the same time, versus one large business, right? And smaller businesses, they can't afford the same kind of security that these large companies can, so they're much easier actually to get into. And the only reason you don't hear about these small businesses is because the media, they love to focus on large companies, right? I mean, no one wants to hear about the HVAC company down the block because no one knows who they are, but everybody loves a big story like Target.
Right, and I think these figures on the slide are amazing. I've seen the same stats in other places. 1 in 5 small businesses falls victim to cybercrime each year. You certainly do not hear that out in the media, but it's something that's happening all the time, and it's a real threat.
Absolutely, and small businesses, they're low-hanging fruit. So, you know, there's many examples. We're in IT, so I can give you many examples of clients and who have had these types of issues that have happened to them, even companies that we've taken over. They had to eliminate their existing IT company because they weren't they weren't properly securing their networks, and their data was breached.
So it's a real threat, even if you don't hear about it in the media every night. Well,
Absolutely.
well, let's look then at what some of the consequences of it would be. I mean, someone attacks a provider, what's likely to happen?
So, there's the average estimated cost associated with a stolen record is $201. And actually, I think it went up. I'm sorry, I meant to look into it. I think it's about $214 is the average estimated cost of a stolen medical record, or just the record in general. But, that doesn't even include what I've listed here is your reputational damage, the loss of your clients, the class action lawsuits, the embarrassment, the compliance lawsuits, replacement of your data, and downtime and loss of productivity. So backups are key here. But these are some of the things that a small business doesn't even consider when they're looking at putting in some additional expenses in their security so they don't get compromised. I mean, it's a huge cost.
Yeah, and I think the reputational damage, people don't necessarily take that seriously enough, but you have to think about the fact that if you're following HIPAA and you breach a patient's records, you've got to write that patient a letter and tell them what
Yep.
happened. So, imagine if you had to send, let's say you breach, only 200 records only, that's not as bad as, the big breaches, but you still got to write those 200 patients and tell them that you goofed up on protecting their data. That can't be good for your business.
Absolutely. Those patients might look elsewhere for their care because they're worried that, their personal information is being leaked out and being sold on the market. And not to even say that, some of you may not be in the healthcare industry who are on this call, but even for non-healthcare clients, your customers find out about their data being released, and believe me, they're going to start looking for another company to do business with. So there's a huge loss, not just with each record, but also for your entire business, losing clients. And we all know how difficult it is to, or how expensive it is to gain new customers. If you think about your sales, your marketing, and all the effort that you put into gaining new clients, the cost associated with that is very high, and then to attract new clients is even harder. And you know how people are. I mean, everybody will tell their friends and colleagues about it, and so there goes that reputation. So it's a big deal.
Yeah, and then, in healthcare, on top of all that, you've also got the possibility of government fines and all that, in addition to the lawsuits. So this is just a nightmare for folks that have to suffer through this, unfortunately. But it's
Yeah,
really a
absolutely.
huge hit to the business and a major distraction, to say the least.
Absolutely. I hope everybody has some cyber insurance for their organization. Some of that can protect you a little bit against those legal fees and that you have to pay.
So tell us about the
Okay.
malware threat, if you would.
All right. So malware threat. This is a huge number. 82,000 new malware threats are being released every single day. So think about that. You can't just think that a simple firewall and an antivirus is enough these days with, and the sophistication of these attacks. Having a firewall, sometimes we hear clients, they want to just go out and they're looking and they say, why do I have to purchase this firewall that costs this much? I want to get the cheaper one. And why do I have to get enterprise level antivirus? Let me just get the the free one or the home edition. So some of these firewalls and antiviruses is like trying to stop a tank with a squirt gun. They just don't work. So you really have to look to your IT company, your IT in-house director to look at the best, antivirus and firewalls that are in the market that can really protect you, and look into that, because not every one of those works as well as you need it to protect you against these 82,000 malware threats that are being released every day.
That's a great point. It makes me think of the Target case, because if you'll remember, I don't know if folks know all the details, but what happened in that case is that an HVAC company that serviced Target got hit with malware. And one of the details people may not have heard is that little company was using Malwarebytes, which is a great program, for detecting malware, great for consumers. They were using the home version where there's no active scanning or anything. It's just you got to remember to run the thing every month or something, which is probably how often most people run it. The point being that they didn't have adequate protection in place. The malware completely infiltrated their network, and then that became the gateway that those malevolent actors used to get into Target. So having adequate protection in place, there's also an organizational aspect to think about there. Anyone who has access to your network, you want to make sure that their security is adequate, because in Target's case, it certainly was a big disaster that happened.
Yeah, absolutely. And Brian, I'll just add to that. So, the way that this malware came in, also, it went to a lot of their cash registers, and that's how they were able to get the debit card information and credit card information. And the key thing here is that Target, as you can imagine, they're a multi-billion-dollar organization, didn't know that this malware was on these cash registers running every day for 30 days. So some of these companies, they don't even know. If Target didn't know, you might not know that this is happening, because, and we'll go over, I'll talk about malware a little bit more here, but, there are some symptoms that you get, pop-ups and sluggish things, but in some cases there's nothing, so you can't really tell. And for 30 days that these criminals, these cyber criminals, were gathering all of the debit cards and credit cards from Target customers, they were using that information to purchasing and taking out millions and millions of dollars, and no one knew about it.
Right, and Target just settled the suit with Visa, I saw the other day. They wouldn't disclose the amount, but I am sure it was a pretty penny.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, I think this is very interesting, because this is something I didn't know. So tell us, what is a shocking truth about bank fraud that most businesses don't know?
Well, so, first of all, the FDIC does not protect you from bank fraud. And then the bigger thing that, I learned is that your bank is not responsible for getting your money back. And I had to survey a couple of banks just to make sure that this wasn't one bank or two banks or something out on the internet. But banks are not responsible for getting that. There are, we've even had businesses who are in retail where they've gotten hacked, and one of their employees clicked on a phishing email, or there was some kind of wire transfer, and they didn't protect themselves with dual authentication, and so money was taken from their account, and the bank's not responsible for it. So you're out of luck, which is really unfortunate. And there's no insurance for bank frauds for businesses.
That's really interesting, because I think people have this expectation because of credit cards, where you do have some protections, that, well, if something happens, it's not going to fall on me anyway. But that's really not the case.
No, that is not the case. In many cases, your credit card will take responsibility for that, but your bank will not. And so, one thing that I would advise everyone who's on the call, especially if you're a business owner, is to contact your bank and talk to them about the different ways that you can protect yourself from bank fraud. And on the next slide, Brian, I do have some tips that I've listed out, and I've talked to a couple of banks, and also just some policies that we follow here internally at MXO. But one thing you can do is to have a dedicated computer for your banking. And I don't mean a computer where the only thing you do is banking, but just one computer that you use for all your banking, and other things that you work on. And the reason for that is because you kind of eliminate the possibility of hackers getting authentication from other computers and you don't know what's going on while they're withdrawing money from that particular computer. Debit cards. So be really careful with debit cards. They're kind of the #1 way accounts get compromised. And, you know, even personally, I've had my debit card compromised recently. So look at those charges. Get alerts from your bank, and anything that's over $100 that's withdrawn from your account, take a look. Look at those strange $1 charges. You know, look at your bank statements. I know we get busy, but keep up with those. Dual authentication, I mentioned that earlier. What you can do, especially for wire transfers, those are really big in getting money out of your account. So you can require your signature or an email release every time there's a wire transfer. Some banks, they will call you just to verify. Make sure that your bank has this in place for you to protect you from some of this fraud. And then, you know, there's some positive and negatives with this one, but you can also spread your money out in multiple accounts to minimize the risk. So something you need to think about and talk to your banker, but then, you know, you're managing a couple different accounts. But that is a good way to also eliminate that risk. And then positive pay. Positive pay is something that you can do check verifications on a daily or weekly basis, where the bank receives in advance a name of the payee that the check is being sent to, and then the amount, and then the bank has to verify that amount. So that way somebody isn't just writing a check to themselves or to their boyfriend, or, you know, there's some theft of checks or wire transfer. So they kind of verify all that information.
Well, I like this because it's a mix of kind of technological solutions, but also process solutions. The idea of having a dedicated PC for banking, I've never heard that before, but it makes a lot of sense.
Great.
All right, well,
okay.
When we're looking at threats to small businesses, what are the biggest threats that they face?
Well, so we talked about several of them already. We have, but here's some that I want to point out. Social media, which is security, loss of productivity, bad PR, ransomware, cloud computing, mobile, and spam. And we'll go through these one by one. If you want to flip over to the next slide.
All right, let's look at these in detail then. So when it comes to social media, what's the threat?
So social media. Well, first of all, here I don't know if everyone's aware, but, you know, 600,000 Facebook accounts are hacked every single day. And I think everybody has a Facebook account. I don't know many people besides, you know, maybe my grandfather. But, you know, the problem with social media here is that you get these phishing emails that aren't necessarily from Facebook. Like in this case, you know, somebody sends you, one of these cyber criminals sends you an email asking you to update your Facebook account. Facebook changes its security policy on a daily basis, and they get lower and lower. You get emails like, oh, can you verify your mother's maiden name, your date of birth is on there. People post everything that they're doing on social media, so even on a personal level, there's companies and hackers now that are tracking these Facebook accounts, looking for when you're going on vacation, what you're doing, so they can rob your house. Employees posting, you know, I have a fun example here that I'm going to go through in just a second, but and it's just a big waste of time. So social media can really be a big threat to your business, and I'll go over the productivity loss on the next slide here, where you could see that you know, Tumblr, Facebook, and Twitter, and Instagram, and Snapchat, these are huge percentages, and the time that's wasted by employees sitting on social media every day. So, you know, we deal with a lot of small, medium-sized businesses. One of the things that we've done is we've implemented solid content filtering into our clients' businesses, so they can block some of these sites or just manage them to certain people and certain times of the day when, you know, employees can use them. And you know, it depends on the business, but oftentimes, business owners are busy. They're busy setting their vision and solving big problems. They don't have time to monitor and manage their employees and what they're doing on a daily basis. But as you could see here, these are really large percentages of the time that's being spent on social media by your employees.
Who's the guy doing 6 to 10 hours? I mean, that's just unbelievable.
He doesn't have a job.
Yeah, not for long, hopefully. Well, this is amazing stuff, and I have to say that it causes me great concern when I talk to providers where they don't even have a policy around social media. So it's kind of
Yeah.
a free-for-all, and you've got these systems that have all this valuable data on them with all of these medical records, and yet, employees are then just kind of flipping over and going onto Facebook. It seems like such an obvious vector for malware to get in and start stealing that data. It gives me, goosebumps sometimes when I hear people talk about it because they don't seem to realize the threat.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a very good point, Brian. And that takes us to the next page. This is just kind of, when I saw this, I couldn't believe it. But I don't know if you guys recall, there was this story here on Burger King worker who posted pictures of himself standing in these lettuce bins. So not only is it a huge waste of time, but then people do stupid things like this, where they take pictures and if you limit this during business hours, maybe by the time they get home they're too tired and they don't have the time to do this anymore. But I think this was done even during business hours. So I mean, talk about the embarrassment for your business, when things like this happen, and people do it.
Yeah, and even if it's not as extreme as this, I have heard
Right.
stories of providers who took selfies and they do it in front of a screen with a medical record open behind them, just not thinking, so they're
Yeah.
not, it's not as bad as them standing in the lettuce. This guy, I'm sure, was fired and good.
I'm sure.
But
Right. No, I
still,
mean, I agree. I agree.
yeah,
This is a very extreme example, but there's other ways that social media can be used in a negative way to impact your business. So it's not even just the time that people are spending, but it's things like this that can happen. So I would just eliminate some of this, or manage it better.
yeah, at least have a
I
policy.
agree with you, Brian. Put some policies in place.
So ransomware, there might be folks who don't even know what ransomware is, although I think it's been getting a lot of press. Tell us about ransomware.
All right. Well, let me tell you first what ransomware means. And some of you on this call may have even had this happen to you, but it's when these cyber criminals send you a link. It could be like a phishing email. It could be a website, a fake website that looks exactly like a website that you access every day, like QuickBooks, or even Dropbox or something like that, and you click on one of these links or these emails, and suddenly what they do is they encrypt your data. They can encrypt your data on your entire server, or they can encrypt your data on your computer. And this is real stuff. Like, if you think this is fake, we've had a couple clients that this has actually happened to, where they send you then this email, and if you could see here, you've got 54 hours and 15 minutes and 15 seconds to pay them, and $100 is low here. It's usually
Yeah.
$500 is kind of the going rate, right? It's pretty standard. Just like in my business, I have standard fees that I charge for my IT services. Criminals have standard fees that they charge for, giving you your data back. So it's about $500 that you have to pay them, and then they've really thought this through. They give you like a key code that you then enter, and then it unlocks the files, and then you can have them back. That's kind of how ransomware works.
Well, and there has been so much of it lately. It just seems to be proliferating all over the place. Different versions of it. This is CryptoLocker, but there's all these new versions of it that seem to be circulating.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't know if there's some providers out there still who are using XP, but this is one we've seen. We have a healthcare customer who has an older medical management system where they weren't able to upgrade their software, so they had to keep a couple XP machines, and guess what? There's no more support from Microsoft on XP, and this is why it's so important for you to use the latest versions of software, because once they stop supporting it and they stop supplying the Microsoft updates, it's very easy for these criminals to get in, and this is where they can get access to your information, and these ransomware demands start to come in. So now the other thing that I want to mention to protect yourself from this is to have really good backup systems in place. That's how we've been able to avoid the ransomware and look back at their backup systems and recover all that data. But again, all of this takes time, and it's loss of productivity, so you could do other things that we'll go over at the end to protect yourself.
Well, the other thing that's terrible about it too is that typically you have to make these payments in Bitcoin, and there's really no way to track that. And so the criminals just get away with it and move on to the next target. There's really no way to track them down most of the time. And the other thing is, in a healthcare context, people forget that, the government requires you not just to keep people from looking at records, but you're required to maintain those records. You have to maintain access to those records. So if you lose records because they get encrypted by a criminal actor, even though you're the victim of a crime, you're still violating HIPAA because you're required to keep access to those records. So it's kind of a double bind. It's really tough.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And in that case, even with a backup, you have to pay the ransomware because you want to get that data back.
Yeah, absolutely.
And who knows if they've made a copy of it or not. So.
And here is something, just to get into mobile, I think people are really not paying enough attention to the changing mobile universe. Tell us more about the threat there.
Well, no, I agree with you there, Brian, and this is so big because everyone has a mobile phone, right? And most of you are using mobile devices to access your company information. You allow your employees to access your company information. And then there's simple things that we often see companies that fail to do, like putting a password on your phone, requiring that password to be reset after 60, 90, 120 days, depending on what your internal policy is, to put a remove kill switch to wipe it out if it's lost or stolen. So here, anyone who has a company phone, and by the way, at the end of this, everyone who stays on is going to get our mobile use policy template that we've created that we'll give to all of you that you can adjust to your practice. But if someone loses their phone, you need to have the ability to wipe it immediately so that that information, your emails and data isn't compromised. This is a real big deal.
And I've seen figures that about 90% of businesses are allowing bring your own device, where BYOD as they call it, where you bring your phone into work and you're allowed to sign into the work network and everything. And I just think it's another area where people should really, take a moment and think through some policies that might limit their risk, because every time you let those phones come in and get on your network, if there's sensitive data on there, there's the chance that those phones could be the way that malware gets in.
Absolutely. Yeah, and many people store their passwords on their phones.
Absolutely.
They, even, every phone, especially iPhones are much better in terms of security than maybe Android, but everybody has those, there's this application that comes with a phone called Notes. And I see oftentimes people will put different passwords and login information just in their notes, and there's no password to get into the phone. You could click on some of those applications and get into everything. Oftentimes people, on the phones have mobile apps that they use for their business, and they hit that button that says, remember my login and password,
yes.
Right? So you can just click on that one little convenient icon that Apple created and get into your bank account, because people are busy, they don't want to, they forget their usernames and passwords, so they have their iPhone or Android remember all of that login information. And so once someone gets into that phone, they can get into everything. So this is really key.
Well, let's talk about, we've already talked about this a little bit, but let's talk about cloud computing dangers as well.
Sure. So, on this slide, the biggest point I wanted to make is that, everyone needs to encrypt their laptops. We talked about phones a little bit, but in this case, I really wanted to cover laptops. We still have companies who, give their employees laptops and they don't purchase any kind of encryption software and install it. And, if your laptop is stolen or if it's lost and the data was not encrypted, you have violated a breach. And I believe it's 500 patient records in most states. And Brian, you could probably cover this better, but even in this state here, 441 patient records for this Idaho nonprofit were stolen, and they had to pay a $50,000 fine, this small, North Idaho hospice. And so what they could have done very easily is bought a, encryption software that they could have installed on their laptop and avoided this whole thing.
Yeah, absolutely. This fine that they're talking about, this is actually issued by the federal government, and it was a little surprising to people because it was the first time, I believe, that the federal government had ever applied a fine for a breach of fewer than 500 records. Usually when it's 500 records or more, that's when they get involved and they'll do an investigation. Usually if it's smaller, they won't do a full-blown investigation and charge a fine, but there are certainly exceptions. This is the first of them where they said, in this case, the violation was egregious enough that they felt that they had to impose a fine. And as you're saying, all they had to do is encrypt that data, and then it's not even a breach, according to the federal government. Then
That's
you just
correct.
make a note of it that you lost the laptop in your security file, and you move on with your life. It's not even a breach that you have to report to patients or the government or anybody. And you look at OCR, they say that's the body in HHS that enforces this stuff. They say that more than half of all the breaches listed on the 500 or more list, more than half of those involved the theft of an unencrypted device like a laptop. So, I
Yeah,
mean, it's
Brian,
just a
and also
huge threat.
Brian, just to add a little bit here also about, this is Bart, about encrypting your desktops too. So even when you have desktops at your organization, inside your office, let's say someone breaks a window and just takes a couple of desktops, you might have records on there too if they stand by the window or somewhere that's easier accessible and it's easier to be broken into. If you encrypt those desktops, then you don't have to worry about that either. But we actually do recommend for all medical practices, and even us here, we encrypt every single computer that belongs to the company. Every desktop, every laptop, everything gets encrypted, so we never have to worry about any break-ins or anything like that.
Absolutely. That's a great point because it's another case where even though you got a criminal breaking into your business, you're still responsible for the lost records, which, so, that doesn't seem very fair, but it is the way the law works. And your example, it makes me think of the example last year, LA County, there was a couple of guys who broke into a business associate of LA County, and it's pretty clear they just wanted to steal computers. They ran off with 8 desktops. But those 8 desktops had 330,000 health records in them. And so those folks at LA County were on the hook for that. That's a huge breach that they have to answer to the government, even though it was guys breaking in. And like you said, they could have fixed it, never had a problem if they just would have encrypted those desktops.
Yeah, and I was a victim of one of those as well. Advocate Health Services out
Yes.
in Illinois, they had a break-in. Someone broke into their office and same thing, took the desktops, and then a few months later, I received a letter with credit monitoring and all kinds of other things attached with it because someone broke in and just took the desktops.
Yep, that's right. That was a big story we forgot to mention. But
Yeah,
those
here in
were
the Chicago area.
desktops.
Wow.
Yeah, absolutely. And Advocate, they also have great security, great infrastructure. They're a successful organization. So if it can happen to them, it can happen to the rest of us.
So if nothing else, when you've got protected health information on a hard drive, encrypt that hard drive. Just do yourself a favor and encrypt that hard drive. Okay, well, spam. Spam nation indeed. Tell us more about the threat from spam.
Well, ironically, Brian, you used my story that I was going to share about
Oh,
Target. And no,
I'm
no, no,
sorry.
no, it's okay. We have several other slides to go over, but we don't have to beat a dead horse here. We know we talked about Target spam. I think that was a great example you gave for everyone here. Spam still remains the biggest single driver of big breaches today. And I show a picture here of Brian Krebs' book, The Inside Story of Organized Cybercrime. I've read a little bit on him and some other security and cyber authors. And if anyone is interested or perhaps wants to purchase this book for their security officer or IT director, this would be a great present you can purchase on Amazon.com to help educate your staff. So you could listen to this webinar, but at the end of the day, you have to, when you leave here, you have to start implementing some of these policies and suggestions, and I just thought this would be a good book for everybody to maybe purchase.
Yeah, and just to be clear, in that Target situation, if I didn't say it clearly enough before, the way it started was with spam. They just were blasting out phishing emails, these criminals, and they got a hit with the HVAC. And my understanding is they didn't originally even target. They weren't targeting Target. They were just blasting out spam, and then they hit the jackpot. And that, you don't want to
That's
be
right.
the unlucky one that they find.
Yeah, absolutely, and spam is just, and this is something that you can also control if you purchase, quality spam filtering software, so that your employees aren't even tempted. Again, we, have companies that get something that's because they're trying to save a few dollars, and and then they're spending thousands once someone gets in and steals their information, like in this case, Target that we're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, not just Target, also with spam. I mean, regular spam, your email server a lot of times will come with spam filtering. And yeah, even though in some cases that might be enough, that's not always enough, because if you go out and get a service, could be $2 to $5 per user that has an email address with you, it will do all the spam filtering for you. It will do antivirus, anti-malware filtering that's inside of those emails. You can also set up different policies. You can encrypt your email that way. There's a lot of benefits that those spam filtering software services actually give you.
Thank you, Bart. Yeah, that's a good point. And we're happy after this webinar to, answer questions, or you could feel free to contact us, and Bart's our security compliance officer. He could give you a lot more information.
Yeah, we'll be sure to
Okay.
follow up with lots of contact information for folks. So
Sounds good.
So we've basically been talking about this a little bit, but if you want to add
Yeah.
anything about how, the ways that cyber criminals gain access, the big one obviously that we've been talking about here just a moment ago is phishing.
Yeah, phishing. So, these online criminals, they've gotten really good at this, and what they'll typically do is send messages that look like legitimate messages from your bank, from, eBay, from PayPal, from your credit card company. And in the message, there's usually a website link where it asks you to update your contact information, right? And, many of us have been victim of this, where we click on that link and we start to update our contact information. And while you're doing that, the entire time, these criminals are getting into your computer and your server. So this is a very easy way for them to get in.
Yeah, and absolutely. And I just, what you were saying before, Bart, about not relying necessarily on human processes here really comes through. Like if you've got a good spam filter in place, the trick with these phishing messages is they get better and better at tricking you, So
Yeah,
even
they
if
do.
you're a relatively sophisticated user, relatively sophisticated users have gotten fooled by these things. So counting on the human
So,
element is kind of tough.
yeah, absolutely. And phishing is mostly, we want to reference here. You see my little guy. It's a website, and I agree, Brian. It looks exactly like that. While this isn't necessarily business related, but a friend of mine thought it was a great idea to purchase a car on eBay a few years ago, and it was not eBay that she was actually purchasing the car on. It was one of these phishing kind of websites, and she put in all her information, and by the time she realized it and contacted eBay, eBay said, you know, take a look at this URL. It's, you know, it says
This is not
eBay at the
us.
top, but underneath the description, you know, it has nothing to do with eBay. And guess what? Just like our bank that we talked about earlier, eBay does not have any protection against it. And, you know, she lost $5,600. So,
Yeah, well, I mean, you know,
yeah,
it's not eBay's website, so they're really not responsible for it.
that's right. That's right. It's you know, for you to educate yourself on these types of things.
So what about email scams then?
All right. So, email scams. Um, you know, these are con artists, and they send pretty convincing emails for wire transfers, for asking you to give your credit card information to buy a fake product or to pay shipping on a free gift. And oftentimes, you know, you say to yourself, oh, that would never be me. But let me tell you, I have more stories than you can imagine of people who are intelligent, who you know, are highly educated, who are even in the IT industry, who have been scammed by these criminals. And if it sounds too good to be true, it is. So this is like these, you know, kind of emails with stories, and some of them are really convincing, Brian.
Yeah, and sometimes it's really not clear if it's a business that's writing you or if it's just some individual. It's very, they've gotten better at making these messages hard to, you know, decipher.
Absolutely. And if somebody hacked into one of your customers' networks, they could send, you know, an email that looks like it's coming from your client, and they just maybe change one letter. So if it's, you know, Joanna Sobran, J Sobran, maybe they put in J Sobran with two N's at the end, and we don't look for these little things. We don't
No.
notice, and you think that the email's coming from me, and it's not. And so, you know, you end up clicking on a button because you trust that you know me, and you know, we've done business before, and so you end up clicking on it. So be very careful with those.
Okay, and then spyware. Let's talk a little bit about that.
So, spyware. Spyware is basically a software that's installed on your computer without your consent, right, to monitor, control your computer use. I talked about this a little earlier, but you know, there are some clues where spyware is installed on your computer, and this is like a barrage of pop-ups that you get, a browser that takes you to a different site that you don't want, unexpected toolbars or icons on your computer screen, keys that don't work, random error messages, sluggish performance when opening, you know, programs or files. So, you know, you can tell right away when something's wrong with your computer. My recommendation would be to contact your help desk support immediately to see if any of these symptoms mean that you've got spyware on your computer. And sometimes, you know, there's nothing at all and you just don't know. So, but this is where cyber criminals gain access to, you know, all your personal information over the web, and it's easy for them to come in and start to control your computer and, you know, take whatever data information that they want, or send emails from your computer to your customers, to your contact list, all those types of examples.
Yeah, if you browse around the web, it's just a matter of time before you're going to pick up spyware from somewhere. You know, it's unavoidable these days, and if you don't remain vigilant against it, if you don't have technology in place to deal with it, they're going to steal your information.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what can providers do to protect themselves from all these things?
Well, so the first thing is to really have a solid unified threat management, not just some haphazard security software. Again, kind of going back to making sure that the firewalls that you purchase are very, you know, quality with great contact filtering, gateway antivirus systems, all, you know, have a security plan in place, have a security officer. One of the things that Formed offers, and that's why we partner with them for our customers, is that they do training. So everyone here that works at MXO goes through Formed HIPAA training, and then we have our security officer, Bart, who's done his training. We have a plan in place, and, you know, we We have a checklist, and we know exactly what we need to do when we hire a new employee, whether they need encryption software installed, what training they need to take. All those things, are taken very seriously. Spam filtering, purchase a good spam filtering software. Controlling what websites employees are accessing. Some of them we talked about, the social media on different sites. Monitoring your third-party use of applications. If not every employee needs to access these third-party applications, don't allow everyone to log in. Implement a Go ahead.
I'm sorry to interrupt. That's interesting though. What is the threat that you see from a service like Dropbox if it's not properly monitored?
If it's not properly monitored, I think the biggest threat that you will see is employees stealing data.
Yeah.
People actually uploading PHI data or any kind of confidential information that they have access to their Dropbox, and then be like, oh, let me look at it more at home. Maybe I can find something in there that I like.
Right.
Or things like that. I mean, that's things that you don't want. You don't want your employees to take your data and put it on their own personal stuff.
Absolutely. All right, go on, Joanna. I'm sorry.
Implement a mobile device policy and security protocols. This is something that I'll give you at the end here. Here's a big one. It's to force passwords. I cannot tell you how much kickback we get from our customers about this request. So when we take over a client as part of our onboarding process, we implement a password policy. One, the passwords have to expire a certain amount of time. People can't write their passwords on sticky notes and leave them all over their desk. And, their password can't be Joanna, right? I mean, so one of the things that we tell people is to, and this is a simple thing, if there's one thing you take away from today, is to implement sentences or phrases for your passwords. And I know that, people get frustrated because they have too many passwords to remember. And so one tip that I could give you is something easy you can do is implement like a phrase or a sentence like, I love the Sox 2015. I'm not even a baseball fan, but let's just say, I love the Sox 2015, and the O's are zeros,
right,
and the S is a dollar sign, exclamation point in 2015, maybe for the year that we're in now, or the year where you went to your favorite game. I don't know. It's something that's just easy for you to remember. Think about phrases, sentences that you don't have to write down on sticky notes, and they could that you could use a few of them. I think that's really helpful, and people just think that they have to have something that's an exclamation and at sign and plus. No, you don't have to do that to make a password complex.
Right, and substituting symbols for letters, that's a great trick, because then it's something that you can still keep in your head, but it's not something that's easy for anyone else to guess.
Yeah, absolutely. Your A's can be your at signs, your S's can be dollars, your O's can be zeros. Even the year 2015, the 5 could be an S, so get creative with what you can implement. And this is, a policy that your security officer can implement into your organization.
And unfortunately, we know from hacks where they've released people's passwords, the most common password is password. It's just, you put a little more effort in than that, please.
Or the username, too.
Yeah, their username or ABCD, terrible.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's a big one. Backups. We still see people, companies who use tape backups or, where they take them off-site. And, I always ask the question, who takes them off-site? They go, and it's the office manager or, one of the clinical staff that takes them off-site. And, there's things like, your car gets stolen, or you put your backups in your windshield, and the sun is hot and it melts your tapes, so and you can't recover any of that information. We recommend image backups from reputable companies where if you ever need to recover your data, it's very easy for you to do. It doesn't take days and weeks. You have your backups in the cloud and on site. to properly protect you against these threats. Employee education and acceptable use policy. So HIPAA workforce training and security training. You know, I put this in here because this is a big thing that you can do, even though, you know, employees will complain, why do I have to take this 4-hour online course? You know what? After they take it, I get the feedback, wow, I didn't know all of these things. And maybe not everyone will follow these policies. The majority of people will know, and they're educated, and they will help protect your organization against some of these threats. So I definitely recommend the workforce training that Formed offers, or any other company that you might use, and to have a security officer, someone responsible in your organization who makes sure that that you have the right software in place, that you're following your policies, and that you're getting the training that you need. And one thing that you don't have on here, Brian, that I would just like to add,
Sure,
is to lock down the ability for employees to use home PCs and devices to access your network and your cloud applications. You know, don't let employees, and you know, you might think to yourself, oh, I don't have to buy another laptop or a computer. Let me tell you, the money that you spend on that laptop or computer is going to far outweigh the cost that you will have if you let people bring in their home PCs and laptops where everybody else in their household is working on them. And
yeah.
again, you put yourself in a bad position there.
There certainly
I know,
have been
Bart,
some big breaches that have been caused that way.
yeah, Bart, I don't know if you want to add a comment about that.
I mean, that's the number one thing. I mean, and if you do allow to bring your own device or bring your own laptop, you have to make sure that your applications are protected. You have to make sure that if someone is using, if it is remote desktop to connect to your network, to their computer at the office, you can protect yourself within there where you don't allow any kind of drive redirection, any kind of printing redirection, so they can't print out of there, they can't copy anything out of there, and they can't save anything off of that computer to a different hard drive. So there are steps that you can protect yourself, but it's always the best way always is to provide your employees with a company laptop.
Thank you.
Well, we're running short on time. I want to remind our audience that if you did ask a question, we probably won't have time to address it here live, but that's fine because we're going to follow up. You'll get the slides, the recording, and written responses to your question. Now, this is great, I think, because this is so needed. Tell us a little bit about this white paper that they can get.
Okay, so, you know, this is a policy template that we've put together for mobile device management and computing, and you know, I'm not going to, you can download it here by using this link and go to the MXO website. Is this the right, Karen, is this the right link that we have? No. It looks like, Brian, maybe it wasn't updated. Sorry, with the last minute we changed it. We were updating some of this. So, Brian, if you don't mind.
We'll substitute the link and make sure that folks have the right information when we send the follow-up out. Or go, if you have the link handy and can read it off, that also works.
Sure, that'd be great. All right, so the link that we have is, you know, the same thing, www.mxotech.com, and then it's /mobile computing, and that's it.
Oh, well, that's easy.
Yeah, if you want to actually pull it up, Brian, you can, or just replace that link right there.
Yeah, we'll replace that before we send out the slides.
Yeah, so it's www.mxotech.com /mobile computing. And this is something that everyone can take with them, read through it, and share it with your IT person. You can certainly adjust it. It's a template that we put together just to give you a head start. And
right. Now tell us about this one as well. This is interesting.
Well, you know, we wanted to, not only did we want to have this webinar today, but we wanted to offer some folks an ability to get an assessment from our security team on their network. And we, you know, can't offer to everyone, but The first few people who are interested, we'd be happy to schedule that with you. We'll come out to your office, and there's a little bit more information on our website on how this works, but we'll come out to our office and we'll look at the securities and the backups and the policies that you have in place and give you recommendations. So that's something that we want to do for some of the attendees.
Well, do take advantage of that. That's a great opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, Brian, we do have a different link for that too. I guess we've changed both of them. It's www.mxotech.com, and it's /cybersecurity audit.
Okay. Well, again, we'll make sure if you're interested in that, you can go ahead and type that in now. That's mxotech.com/cybersecurity audit. But we'll also, if you're waiting for the slides, we'll make sure all the links are updated to the proper link when we send this out to you.
Yeah, those are the only two things that we really have to change. And then, Brian, I'm not sure how we're going to, you know, then we could give everybody that report as well. Let me just make sure this works.
Yeah, so we'll
and if anybody's having a hard time, just email us.
Absolutely. That's what I was going to say as well.
And we'll send it over to you.
Yeah, you can always contact us here at Format Approved. You can email us at format@formatapproved.com, and we'll be happy to pass on any questions you have to MXO. What's a good contact email over there that folks could contact you with?
An email for me is jsobran@mxotech.com. So JSOBRAN @mxotech.com. And you can also just, you know, if it's easier, send an email to sales@mxotech.com, and you know, George and Karen and Lindsay and everybody's on that communication. So either of us will reply back to you.
All right, well, so there's lots of ways to get in touch, and if you have any questions, we'll be sure to pass those on. Again, if you want to learn more about MXOtech, you can go to www.mxotech.com. If you're interested in any of the training that was mentioned today, stop by our online catalog at www.formedtraining.com. I really want to thank you at MXOtech, Joanna and Bart, for joining us today. Very informative session. I hope that it was useful to our audience, but I certainly learned some things.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Brian, for having us. We really enjoyed it and appreciate your partnership.
Well, thank you so much. Now, again, if you asked a question, we're going to pass those on to our experts, so you'll get those in the follow-up. Please join us for the next Learning Lunch session. I believe we've got one in a couple of weeks, another security title. So if you go to our homepage and click on the Learning Lunch button, it looks just like the one on your screen there, you can see the upcoming events and register for these free learning lunches. So thank you to MXOtech again for joining us, and thank you to our audience for joining us. Please join us for the next Learning Lunch, and have a great rest of the day, everyone.